This is the Rocky Flats Oral History Project. I'm interviewing Burt Kelchner. My name is Hannah Nordhaus, and we are at Burt's apartment in the Meridian community in Lakewood. And Burt, to start, if you could just tell me a little bit about your history, when you were born, where, what your parents did growing up, education, that sort of thing.
All right. Now I have written some down for you here if you want it for reference later on, but am I speaking loud enough?
Yeah, you're speaking, it's great.
Okay.
It's great.
Well, I was born in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania in 1921 in November, so I'm approaching my 84th birthday. And I was born into a rather large family. There were 5 children living when I was born in it. There were 3 had passed away as they were young children, as often happened those days, from 2 in the great flu of epidemic of World War I, and then 1 was just a child that couldn't make it. At any rate, I was then the second youngest of the 5 later children. We were all spread out, and my oldest sister was 13 years older than I am. She just passed away a year ago. So that was my beginnings. It was, of course, I grew up in the Great Depression, so my father lost his house. He was out of work for a period of time. He was a carpenter, very good one. He was considered one of the best in the area there. Did a lot of freelancing too because of his special skills. He, at any rate, my mother died when I was only 12, and so I had to help take care of the house for a few years there. I learned to cook and learned to wash and iron and do all sorts of good things, help my little sister where I could, although my married sister would come over the house as much as she could to help with things like that. And by this time my 2 older brothers were gone, making their own way. And so I grew up like that. And I was very fortunate to be a good student. And so when I graduated from high school, I had always wanted to go to college, and I never thought I could, financially. But and there are 2 very fine schools in Bethlehem. One is Lehigh University, which is well known, and one is Moravian College, where I ultimately attended, which is not that well known, but a very fine, very old liberal arts college. So when I graduated from high school, I was lucky enough to get a half scholastic scholarship to Moravian. And that, with my working on the side and so forth, I finally got through Moravian and got my degree in BS in chemistry there. And of course, the war was going on at this time, and I had wanted to get in service, and of course everybody said, well, just wait, you'll have plenty of time. Try to finish your schooling first. So I did. I got in the Army Reserve Corps, and as soon as I graduated, which happened to be in January, the school had gone on accelerated program, so I graduated in 3.5 years. And as soon as I graduated, I was then called up to go into service. Went down to Fort Meade, Maryland, and from there I was assigned to the Army's Chemical Warfare Service in Camp Seibert, Alabama, which was just a temporary camp at the time to train personnel for possible chemical warfare if it occurred like it had in World War I. Fortunately, it never did occur, but that's beside the point, I guess. But that's where I met my wife, Ann. She had just graduated from high school, and she was working at a nearby town there, and I met her at a USO dance we started dating, and first thing you know, she's going to invite me down to see her folks in a little town, some 20 miles away from the camp. But unfortunately, I got my orders to leave Camp Seibert, and I never got to visit her folks at that time. So at Camp Seibert, I was almost finished with my basic training when they told me that the Army had started what was called the Army Specialized Training Program. The government had decided that there were so many troops already serving, and that there were no men left in the schools, that we were going to lose a generation of trained scientists, engineers, etc., if they didn't do something about it. Excuse me for a moment. So the Army Specialized Training Program was set up to take select personnel from those serving in the United States and assign them to various schools in various academic programs to further this purpose. And I was sent to the University of Alabama, which was called a STAR unit, where I took a battery of tests to see where I should go, what I should do. And I had a delightful time there for a month, doing nothing except having very decent food in their cafeteria. A lot of girls around, even though I was really by this time pretty interested in Ann. But I dated a little bit there, and she was still dating some. And at the end of 4 weeks, when all the evaluations were back, I was assigned to go, well, first I was given a choice to either continue my education in chemistry on the graduate level at Carnegie Tech in Pittsburgh, or go to Virginia Tech into their engineering program. Well, I always wanted to be an engineer, so I chose Virginia Tech, and was sent up there. And Ann and I kept corresponding and all this, and I was at Virginia Tech for, let's see, about 10 months, I would say. And a time to finish again, I suppose it would be equivalent at that time to a full year of college. And all I had to do was take engineering courses. I had everything in the world from Moravian. I had, all my liberal arts subjects and chemistry and math and all that. So I took nothing but engineering subjects at Virginia Tech, and just before I was to take my final exam, a couple of weeks before that, a big flurry on the campus and a whole bunch of visitors arrived, and I was interviewed by the dean of Brown University to see if I wanted to go to a special project and talk to me. It wouldn't tell me what it was, but I would stay in the United States and I would do research. Oh, well, why not? What a deal. Well, so I was chosen to go out to Los Alamos. And from the AST schools, we eventually had about over 1,000 young scientists out at Los Alamos that came out via the Army Specialized Training Program from various universities. Like, for example, Virginia Tech sent about 75. There were about 75 from Ohio State. There were about 75 from University of Minnesota, and so it goes, various schools. Some from Stanford, some from Cal, and all that. Well, anyway, I don't know how much to tell you, because this to me is a very exciting thing, but it has nothing to do with Rocky Flats yet, but it will have.
Well, go ahead.
All right. Well, at any rate, being so secret, we were broken up in very small groups to go out to Los Alamos because they didn't want any foreign powers to know what was going on out there. See, the the fact that fission was possible had already been established at the University of Chicago, there under Stagg Stadium, and they were already making plans. They were already beginning to build Los Alamos, and they had well into the building of Oak Ridge and Hanford by the time I knew anything about this stuff. So anyway, being very secret, we went out in groups of 4s usually to be received out at Los Alamos, and I went with three other guys from Virginia Tech, and we had a very nice trip for the most part out there. Stops in Memphis, changed trains, then we had to go to Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, which was an abandoned Army camp in the swamps. And there was just a few people there, and they were transposing our records and so forth from there to go to Los Alamos, so there'd be a break in the paper chain in case anybody was watching. I don't know how effective all this was, but anyway, that's what we were told. So I carried my secret orders with me on the train then through Texas and all the way out to Los Alamos. And we arrived very early in the morning after about 6-7 days away from Virginia Tech, and we slept overnight in an MP barracks there in downtown Santa Fe. And you're familiar, I think, with what's the famous avenue there? All of a sudden my memory's giving me trouble.
Palace Avenue?
Palace Avenue, sure. Palace Avenue, and that's where the project had its headquarters office for receiving new personnel to go up to Los Alamos. And so we reported to Mrs. McKibben the next morning then on Palace Avenue, and there we received our temporary badge, were photographed, fingerprinted, all this sort of thing, given a preliminary lecture again on security, you know, to say nothing to anybody. And then we were placed on a bus to go up to Los Alamos. By this time it was maybe 9 o'clock in the morning. And there were civilians on the bus, which, you know, we didn't know what was happening. And in those days there was no direct road really to Los Alamos. You had to go through Espanola, if you know where that is. I think you do. And so there was a long bus ride up to Los Alamos by that route, like an hour and a half on the roads of that day and so forth, and up that nasty hill, which was not yet fully paved and nice like it is today. And got up on the hill, and then we were given the full indoctrination, not told yet what was going on at all. And at that point we were assigned a bunk in the barracks, and then given more permanent badges, although it was called it was not the final badge. It was called I think a P badge for preliminary clearance, and had to fill out all sorts of paperwork and this and that. Finally, we were taken to the laboratory area, where we were assigned to space to begin work. And it was very typical of research laboratories, I suppose, although I'd never worked in a research laboratory before. The building I was assigned to was the chemistry research building, and they housed both the uranium research in there, enriched uranium, and as well as normal uranium, and the beginnings of some plutonium work, because plutonium had not yet been produced in enough quantity from Hanford for anybody to do much with it. This was in March of 1944. So I was assigned to a nice laboratory, a room about this width but twice this length, with another GI, and I had my space on one side of the room, and he had his space on the other. We both had fume hoods, which was the going thing for chemical research in those days. Remember, this is very old-fashioned now compared to today's instrumentation stuff. Everything by hand, you know, beakers and hot plates and Bunsen burners and all the old-fashioned chemical stuff. So we were then told to get our laboratory stocked. It was brand new, just opened up. And so we were shown how to take vouchers over to the storeroom, and we stocked the place up with all the basic equipment that we thought we would need from our college days. And I reported to a man named Dr. Edward Wickers, who at the time was the chief of the Bureau of Standards chemical laboratory in high purity research. He was quite a well-known man, I think, in his day, written a lot of papers and that sort of thing. Well, I don't think I can take the time to go through all that I did, because it would take too long, really. I mean, and I love to talk about it, so I just can't take that long. But at any rate, I'll give you some documents that you can do some things with. For example, right here on top is a document that a letter that I received from Dr. Oppenheimer himself. And he had written a letter of appreciation to all the GIs that served there at Los Alamos. Up to that point in time, the war was not quite over yet, or I guess the war was over when he wrote that, but I was still in service, because you can see he addressed me as a GI there first. But it was in the processing of enriched uranium that I started my expertise in the business of the nuclear weapon system. Developed some processes under Dr. Wickers that should have been patentable, but could not be patented at the time because of national security. So I was never able to get the patents. But at any rate, as you can see, he has given the GIs there at Los Alamos, and we were in what was called the Special Engineering Detachment, quite a bit of praise for the part that we played. You see, essentially, we were the hands-on in the laboratory. They could not find enough civilians to do the laboratory work. They had all the famous scientists there for the theoretical part of it, including the Nobel winners. We had 5 Nobel winners there at one time, one period of time, but those people aren't in the lab. They normally, in the universities, they have their graduate students do the work for them in the laboratories, and so we acted as graduate students and did the work for them in the laboratories, and that's how the actual physical work got done. And of course, we learned a great deal under those people. And it was just a wonderful period of time. Well, from then we can go on quickly to, are you about to run out on the first one? And then we can go on quickly to my civilian days there, when the war was finally over. Oh, by the way, in the meantime, just before the war was over, I was able to get Ann out to an apartment in Albuquerque. They didn't allow us to have our wives any closer than 100 miles. There was no housing available for Army wives anywhere there. The housing was too tight, and because of security, they just didn't want them around. So I was fortunate enough to get a little apartment down in Albuquerque near the river, out of an old motel, and she came out after her second year of college at the University of Alabama to be with me. I guess I'd forgotten that along in the story. We got married shortly after I got to Los Alamos. I was able to get a furlough and go back and get married because I could see a future for us. And so that's how that worked out. So anyway, then I became a civilian, and a lot of the personnel opted not to stay with that type of work for various reasons. They may have had their own careers waiting for them when they went back from the war, or they may have been perhaps opposed to this type of business and didn't want to stay in it. But for whatever reason, a great many left, so that the experienced people that were left, of which there were a large number of the top scientists, I think perhaps a larger percentage of them stayed than some of the lesser civilians. And a great many of the special engineering detachment GIs opted to stay because here's a built-in career. I mean, you know, and we love the West. We fell in love with the West too. And so they offered me a very good job there. And of course we were able to go home. I was discharged at Fort Bliss, Texas. We had a nice train trip home, visited her folks for a week in Alabama, went up Pennsylvania, visited my father and my sister for a week up there. Saw my brother, one of my brothers in Washington, D.C. on the way up, all that sort of thing. Very nice. Then came back to Los Alamos and went to work. So, and Ann got a job as a government employee in one of the offices there. So we were both working at the time. And from then on, in about a year, we were able to get a house when they started building more housing. Not long after that, we had our first child, our daughter, who now lives over here in Thornton with her family. And then the second child born there, who is now in Phoenix. The one over here is a CPA, the one in Phoenix is a doctor, and then the third child was born here when we came up to Rocky Flats, was born in Denver, and she is now in construction management down in Phoenix. So that's one of the reasons that we had left here after a while, and went down there to see them more often and so forth, but we couldn't stay in Phoenix, so it's too hot. So we decided we'd come back, and when we came back, there was no sense buying another house, so we came here to this facility and we like it very much here. So that's about the story of my life until we get to the actual part about Rocky Flats. So I think maybe we take a little break now.
Sure. Okay, we're back on.
Well, you had asked me, how did I first learn about Rocky Flats? It came about this way. By this time, of course, it was 1951, and I'd been working there as civilian now for nearly 6 years at Rocky Flats, and in the, at Los Alamos. And I thought I heard someone knock. And at that time, there was a lot of talk going around through laboratory circles that the government, because of the Cold War going on and the Korean War had now started, that we had best have a stockpile of nuclear weapons, because they feared Russia. Russia had already gotten the secrets, had already made and tested some nuclear weapons.
Okay.
That knocking, is that going to bother this? I could close the door.
No, it's okay.
All right. So we then heard that indeed they wanted to build a national stockpile of weapons. Well, the University of California informed the government. Now, we did not have, by this time we had the Atomic Energy Commission. That was the first thing, you know, formed after the war was over to handle nuclear affairs in the United States. But the University of California, and I was employed then by the University of California when I was there as a civilian, and they informed the AEC that they did not have the expertise to handle production, that they did not want to participate that, and in fact it would be difficult to have a full-blown production facility at Los Alamos because it was so isolated. No railroad service, for example, up there. Very difficult to get large trucks up there because of the big hill. Things of that type. A big scarcity of construction labor in the Santa Fe area, and no source of supply of the kinds of materials we'd need for that kind of operation in the Santa Fe area. So the AEC agreed, and they said we will search for a site to begin production of these weapons. At the same time, they were concerned enough about possible terrorism, even back then, would you believe, that that a single plant might be somehow destroyed, and since they take so long to build and get running, that we would be again without a stockpile. So they opted to have what they call their duality program. They wanted two places in the United States where all the components of a nuclear weapon could be made. The enriched uranium parts could be made at Oak Ridge because that was the uranium center, enrichment center, and so forth. They assigned the Hanford plant, which was producing plutonium, the task of building some plutonium parts up there. And so it went with all the rest of the parts in the system, like electronic parts and the bomb casings and all the physical parts and all this sort of thing. There were about 12 plants involved in the system. Well, the major plant to put all this stuff together pretty much and do the yeoman's work in it was going to be a separate plant. And so they set out well, first of all, they appointed a committee of people from Washington, from Los Alamos, from I don't know what all sites, that you'd have to look up the report, among whom was my boss at Los Alamos, Dr. Richard Baker, at the time, after the war was over. And Dr. Baker went out as part of this search committee, and they looked at, I think, 35 different sites around the country, 5 of which were here in Colorado. One down near the present Martin plant in South Jefferson County, one out east of Buckley Field, where the big landfill is now. One on the diagonal between Boulder and Longmont, near Niwot. It was all open farmland then. And the one at Rocky Flats. And the 5th one was Colorado Springs. And for various reasons, which you can research in that report, the final selection was the Rocky Flats site. Well, okay, now the site was selected, now they need somebody to run it. And in those days, you know, the government had no expertise within itself, and really doesn't today yet. The Department of Energy has personnel to oversee the big contracts they put out for people to do their work, but they don't do any of the work themselves. But at that time, you know, Hanford was being run by General Electric, and Oak Ridge was being run by oh gosh, I can't. Who makes batteries commonly? Carbide, Union Carbide. Union Carbide was running Oak Ridge at the time. So they cast around and found that the Dow Chemical Company from Midland, Michigan, who was at that time the 3rd largest chemical company in the United States behind DuPont and Union Carbide, would be willing to take on the job of running Rocky Flats. Well, Dow Chemical Company, of course, had no knowledge of this work whatsoever. So now they needed a cadre of experienced people to come in and help design and set up and run Rocky Flats. So the majority of that cadre came from Los Alamos, because that's where most of that work had originated, of course. So out of that cadre of people that came to Rocky Flats, I'd say about 5 were civilians and about 20 were ex-GIs like myself, SEDs. And that's why that in Dr. Oppenheimer's letter there, his reference to the SEDs making such a large contribution really makes sense, because now that is carried on in Rocky Flats. And like myself, many of those GIs that came up became the department heads in later years. One of them made plant manager in later years, and so forth. So we were a very important component of the first personnel of Rocky Flats. All right, now, of course, Dow was capable of starting the first part of the plant without most of us. I mean, one or two went up almost immediately, but we heard about this in about January or February of 1951. And we were supposed to, by about May of 1951, I was hired, and but I was not to go up right away. And later on, well, let's see. Now I have to go back a bit. They started breaking ground. Of course, they had the criteria for the major buildings of the system, and the original major buildings were, of course, 4 of them. They were, 444 building for what we would call normal uranium, or later it was all depleted uranium, where the 235 isotope had already been removed. And the beryllium work was done in 444 in later years. 881 building, which housed the enriched uranium operations. 771 building, which housed the plutonium operations. And 991 building, which was housed the assembly of the units and the storage of them before shipping out to various military locations. And then, of course, all the support buildings, the head office building up front, the maintenance buildings, the firehouse, the laboratories, there's the analytical laboratories, the health physics building, all that sort of thing were beginning. Well, by the end of that year, by the end of 1951, I had still not been asked to come up there, and I was getting concerned about it. But one of my friends down at Los Alamos, who was in charge of the newly built plutonium plant at Los Alamos, was hired by Dow, and he was the man that ran. Do you want me to mention names in this? Yeah. All right. This was a man by the name of Venable, Bud Venable, who was a civilian, and he had come from Hanford, where he was familiar with some of the plutonium work, and he had come down to Los Alamos to help set up the new plutonium handling facility there after the war was over, because until the war was over, they had virtually no plutonium handling facility there. We had some uranium handling, but not much in the way of plutonium. So he was the expert to come up and start that. Well, he came back on a business trip about August, I think it was, and he said, "Burt," he says, "the reason you're not up there now is that you and Glenn Andrews, who's my good friend all these years, who was a metallurgist and doing the metallurgical type work with uranium, Dow considered you two fellows a little bit too young to to head up the plants immediately, and they got a man in from Oak Ridge to do this. Well, that man turned out to not know nearly as much as we did, and pretty soon they decided he wasn't the man, and he went back to Oak Ridge. So now Dow was cast around and brought out one of its own experienced supervisors to head up the enriched uranium plant, even though he didn't have our kind of experience in uranium, but experienced in handling a chemical plant, you know, size and all that. And so Glenn Andrews and I had the chemical side of the plant, along with another man, and Glenn Andrews had the metallurgical side of the plant and the machining, and I had to spend about, well, let's see, when I first came up, our building was the last on the schedule of the 3 facilities, that is of plutonium, depleted uranium, and the plant, the 991 building. Ours was the last one scheduled for completion, so by this time the construction and engineering contractor, who was, you may have been told this already, you got to think of their name, out of Cleveland, Ohio, the Austin Company, couldn't find enough draftsmen and engineers in the Denver area to take on such a huge project. So they told, there were some of us, I was working downtown at the WWII building on Glenarm Street at the time, and they just couldn't take on anymore, and they said, we're going to have to do 881 building back in Cleveland, where we have a lot of people available and a lot more manpower. So I had to spend the next 5 months back in Cleveland acting as a project manager there for that plant to get built before I came back again to Rocky Flats. Oh, I got to visit home occasionally because, you know, the 2 little girls were growing up and my wife here by herself in a strange place, all that. But at any rate, so by about August or September of 1952, then I came back to here permanently and began traveling out to Rocky Flats because I was able to have office space in 991 building, which was already in operation. And from there we were, our new personnel were coming in. I helped interview some of the engineers that reported to me and that sort of thing, and chemical operators, and we did all this kind of work while our building was being built. We finally could get into our building in the office areas so we could operate while the plant itself was being finished. And we finally started operation in, let's see, in 1954, I think, before our building was online. There are other places I think you can find more exact dates and times and so forth. My memory just isn't that good anymore.
What was your exact job title and position? What were you doing?
Well, I'm going to give you a list of that because it turns out that my career at Rocky Flats, I was a jack of all trades, and I had, I think, some 15 major assignments, and I operated out of 8 major buildings, changing offices 22 times, and did things that really nobody else did out there. Now, you might say that maybe I was no good and that's why they didn't keep me in any one thing. On the other hand, it was because I had such vast background experience all of a sudden that I was valuable. I was sort of a utility man. And so I'm going to give you a list of those. It's too long for me to remember offhand, but I got it written down here. And I even, for example, that's in this thing. I did a management school for him one time. I have it here somewhere. I'll show it to you after I'm finished talking. That might be the best thing to do. But it was called the Work Simplification Program, and it was very well received at Rocky Flats. I was sent back east to a special management school, and for 6 weeks, and this was a program to increase efficiency in the plant in all aspects. And when I came back, I had to put all supervisory personnel through my 6 weeks program that I developed from my schooling back there, including the AEC management that were on site, and all the Dow management on site, which came up to some 400 people. I had about 20 classes. It took me 2 years to get through all of that. And then after that was over, I went back to production and had an assignment then as general superintendent of metal production, which included the chemical processes, the making of the metal, the casting, and so forth, to where it was turned over to other metallurgical people for processing into parts. And but at any rate, I did various things then. I ran at one time a department called Manufacturing Engineering, which was the practical side of research under the director of research at Rocky Flats, to assist all the production supervisors with problems they had. And I had about 80 engineers and technicians under me on that particular assignment to support all these people when production problems would come along, which normally a researcher would not handle. They were doing more pure research, and we were doing applied research. So I did that, and then finally I got into this business of what's going to happen to Rocky Flats after it became obvious that the Cold War was over, and the plant was going to be either abandoned or torn down or moved off to other locations or whatever. So in that respect, that was perhaps my happiest days. I've been through all the manufacturing processes through the years and all that sort of thing. Oh, I haven't talked about the fire. You may want to know about the fire at some point. The big fire, not the first one. But I'll get to that later. But the long-range Rocky Flats utilization study was decided on by the Department of Energy to see what they would like to do with Rocky Flats. And again, the Department of Energy themselves decided they did not have the expertise to do this study, and they would just simply supervise it. So they asked Dow. Dow started the study, and I guess I finished it under Rockwell. I'm not certain. Yeah, I guess it was finished under Rockwell. That the contractor make the study under their supervision. So I was appointed project manager for that study, and I spent 3 years on that study. I had 12 major contracts. You can see in the picture up there all the big volumes that were produced by each major contractor that we hired to do various. They studied the suitability of the site in regard to earthquake, wind, rain, flooding, tornadoes. They studied safety in regard to possible terrorism, attacks on the plant, breaking fence barriers, that sort of thing, crashing into buildings, airplane crashes into the buildings, all that kind of safety. There was a study on the economic impact on the metropolitan area if we pulled Rocky Flats out of the area, because at that time it was a major producer of jobs in the Boulder, Longmont, Denver area. And so it goes. Like I say, there were 12 studies, and then we got into the technical parts of, well, could we put some of the operations at Oak Ridge or some other plants? And I had to travel to those plants with some DOE people, and we talked to the managers of those plants and give them the outline of what information they needed to come up with for us to include in the study. And then we had Los Alamos Technical Associates as a contractor. Now this was not the laboratory people. It was a company that was an offshoot from Los Alamos. They were actually operated out of the city of Los Alamos. They were former employees of the lab who had started their own business because they were all experienced. And I hired them to, now when I say I hired, all this goes through a very rigorous program between the DOE contracting office and Dow's contracting officers. There's a very strict program to follow is how you select a contractor. You just don't pick one out of the air, or no favorites, anything like that. It's very complicated. It was very, very interesting, though. I enjoyed that part of it very much. And they were chosen to do studies about how we would move the plant if Oak Ridge or other facilities said, yes, we have room for certain things, and timetables, costs, all that sort of thing. And then finally, the last of the LATA contracts was, how do you tear the plant down and put it back to greenfield like is being done right now? And that ended up. Now that contract then was done by the DOE to satisfy people in this area who were by this time very upset about Rocky Flats and its possible safety concerns regarding the communities around here. And so the governor appointed, and Representative Tim Wirth appointed a Blue Ribbon Committee to follow our progress. So here we were on our side doing the study, and those people were studying our study, if you want to look at it that way. And it was a very interesting interface with them. Sometimes a little testy. You know, we had demonstrations around the plant occasionally, as you probably know, and there were always some people associated with that committee that were very hard to convince that what we were doing was honest work. It wasn't just whitewashing. And anyway, and they hired a bunch of consultants around the country, about 30 of them, to review our technical data. But in the final analysis, we got a pretty decent mark out of it, and they agreed that it was a decent study and that it was accepted. And it got published. And the final reports, of which I have copies here, are summary reports, really, because they reflect what's in that group of stack, which was that high, of technical reports on the subject. I had to take around to the local libraries for permanent housing. Took one to Boulder Public Library, the University of Colorado, Denver Public Library, School of Mines, Jefferson County Public Library. I think there was another one somewhere. The state, I guess I did say the state of Colorado Library, the state library. Anyway, I took copies then around all those libraries, and I presume they're still there today if anybody wants to look up those detailed studies. After that, there wasn't much left for me to do. I was getting close to retirement. I was just working as a capacity of a consultant to one of the top managers there, and didn't have much to do, so I decided to take early retirement, and I retired in officially 1963, on pretty much my anniversary date of 1983, excuse me, and been retired ever since.
Wow.
Although I did then, I was asked by Los Alamos Technical Associates to work for them on special projects, and I worked part-time for them for about 10 years on several projects that were DOE projects dealing with plutonium and enriched uranium. And then finally, at about age 75, I think, I was up for my clearance again. You know, clearance takes place about every 5 years, or renew your clearance, and I had top secret clearance through the years, and finally a clearance came up for review when I was about 75, and word came back to LATA that we think Mr. Kelchner doesn't really need a clearance anymore, that he probably won't be doing anything that would require this. In other words, nice words to say we're not going to clear him anymore. He's too old. So anyway, I decided LATA didn't have much work going at that time anyway in my field. So I told LATA that I would retire now for sure. So that was my second retirement. So.
And I thought one thing that was interesting is you said that initially they had said it was too hard to have full-blown production at Los Alamos, but now a lot of the production work is going from Rocky Flats to Los Alamos.
Yeah, but not on the scale that we did at Rocky Flats. What they're doing at Los Alamos right now is what they call maintenance of the weapons. Mm-hmm. They're not building any new ones by treaty, but the weapons have a shelf life. I suppose some other people have told you this, and there are classified things today yet about shelf life, so I won't get into that. Mm-hmm. But they have a shelf life, and they have to be examined every so many years, and some refurbishment done on the unit, and that's what will be done at Los Alamos. The other work they're doing at Los Alamos, to my knowledge, I think they're still taking some of the weapons apart to meet the treaties in effect as of today. In other words, we probably still have more than the treaty allows, and it just takes a certain amount of time to disassemble a lot of them. Mm-hmm. And I think disassembly work is going on as well as refurbishment, but nothing new. Mm-hmm. Now there is talk, again, about having a modern, up-to-date plant, because even Los Alamos' plant now is the new one, which they built at the time we built the famous 371 building that you heard about, the great big new expansion that never really got off the ground because the Cold War was over. At the same time, Los Alamos had built a brand new plutonium processing building down there where they could make the weapon parts, not nearly as large as this one. But that's where they're doing this refurbishing, reprocessing. But it's, again, out of date. They need to have more modern technology with some of their things, I think. And they're thinking of a possible site for that at being out at Yucca Flats at Nevada at the test site.
Mm. And so have they brought in a lot of the Rocky Flats people who are so knowledgeable about these production processes to reconstitute them in these other places?
I have no idea. I've lost track of the whole business since my second retirement 20, some years ago, 15 years ago, I guess, almost. I have no idea.
Okay.
So,
I'm wondering if you could tell me how it was different, how coming to work at Rocky Flats was different from Los Alamos. It must have been, going from a research facility to a production facility, must have been a different environment and atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. Well, there were many similarities, and there were, of course, differences. The similarities were that in order to work in the plant, you still had to go through an airlock with your protective clothing on, do your work inside, and when you come out, you had to be monitored out, showered out, and so forth. All that was pretty much the same. The facilities at Rocky Flats were, of course, much larger than Los Alamos. I will say much larger. I can't tell you how much larger, because that could be a point of classification. But obviously much larger than the Los Alamos facilities. So therefore, it was a plant instead of a research laboratory. That's the way it started out. Then later on, we built up our research department at Rocky Flats to a considerable number, to about 300 people, many PhDs and among them technicians, of course, advanced technicians, and they had a regular laboratory building that did much the same kind of work that was done at Los Alamos, but for different reasons. At Los Alamos by this time, they are again going back into more pure research instead of applied research. And at Rocky Flats, the research department started out as an applied research facility. Later on got into some pure research, but mostly applied research. And so that was the difference. The atmosphere was that of an industrial concern rather than an academic concern. Los Alamos ran, I should say, almost exclusively as a big part of University of California at Berkeley. It was purely a research facility. All the top guys felt they were still professors, felt they were still just academic, and they really had no knowledge or experience in production methods at all. Mm-hmm. Whereas Rocky Flats had the expertise of production methods from Dow Chemical and then later on from Rockwell to do what had to be done, and with people, the cadre of us that started things out. And by now, of course, the people that we hired as the need for more personnel grew, they became very experienced in their own right, and many of them worked there for 20, 25, 30 years also, and became well known. A lot of them wrote research papers, all this kind of stuff. But it was an industrial facility as opposed to a research facility. That's the best way I could put it to you, I guess.
How did you personally like being in that kind of environment versus an
Well,
academic
I liked it better because I'm a practical person, and although I enjoyed the research I did, I knew that I would never really have a career that I would like at Los Alamos because I didn't have a PhD. At one point in time, about 1947 or 48, when we were really doing a lot of research and refining a lot of the things that were done at wartime, we were always visited by some of the professors and heads of the departments of University of California would come to review our work with us and our supervisors. And one time, the head of the department of the head of the graduate school of chemistry at Berkeley was there reviewing, and he said to me, "Burt," he says, "you ought to go get a PhD." He says, "Why don't you come out to Berkeley?" He says, I can get you installed in the program." I mean, you know, he was going to give me a kind of a free ride to go right into the program and to work for a PhD. But by this time, I had one child, and I guess my wife was pregnant with the second child, and you know, here I had a good job, you know, having gone through the Depression, having nothing, and now having money to have a decent life, a nice life. We had a comfortable home, all that. And then to go back to graduate school, and my wife would have to go to work, and I'd have to, you know, they weren't going to give me any money with this. I mean, they'd just accept me into graduate school, see, without, because, you know, it's hard to get into graduate school sometime, right. But he would get me into graduate school, but now I'd have to provide the funds, I suppose, although maybe there was something available. But I guess I just got cold feet, and I said, no, I'd rather not at this time. So when I went to Rocky Flats, it was really wonderful because now I use my engineering almost exclusively rather than my chemistry, and I really enjoyed that.
Okay, I'm going to stop you. We're Rocky Flats Oral History Project. This is my second tape with Burt Kelchner. It is the 31st of August, 2005. I'm Hannah Nordhaus, and we're at Burt's apartment in Lakewood. Right, Lakewood. So anyhow, we were, I guess, talking about the difference in environments between Los Alamos and Rocky Flats. And when we had the tape off, you were telling me a little bit about some of the work you had done, and I wonder if you could just tell me in terms of production what you were doing and why you liked it. You said you liked being a practical engineer. What you did?
Well, in the first place, Rocky Flats, to my knowledge, had the largest production facility in the then AEC system, later ERDA, now DOE, was the largest for producing the nuclear components of the weapons. And the scale upon which we operated was very interesting to people like myself from Los Alamos, because it was so much bigger than anything we had ever handled in Los Alamos. Mm-hmm. It was small compared to production of other types of chemicals that Dow Chemical was used to, and we always used to laugh and joke about it that when we were designing the plant, they couldn't believe how small some of the equipment normally used in chemical processing was compared to what they have. Now I'm talking in terms of pumps and reactors, digesters, evaporators, mills to grind up materials, all this sort of equipment, which is huge in industry, but which to them, they call it a bucket operation. It was bucket chemistry to them, which is the term often used between a process being developed in a research laboratory and to get to the final production size plant. They would build a pilot plant. I guess you're familiar with the term pilot plant. And a pilot plant, in the slang of that day, was called bucket size. You see, you were out of the beakers and the small stuff. You weren't into the huge tanks and railroad-sized stuff of the big plants, but you were in buckets and that sort of thing. See, and so that was the size of the production. But it was of great interest to me because I had worked in such small size before that even this size now was very fascinating. The chief problem with working at our size was criticality. And criticality, of course, you've probably been explained to you, was the biggest fear within the DOE circles all the years of our production. And yet, at Rocky Flats, we never had a fatality from criticality. Indeed, we never had a critical incident. All the other major plants had. Oak Ridge had one, Los Alamos had several, Hanford had one, and so it goes. But Rocky Flats never had one. We were very, very, very exacting about our operating people following the criticality regulations that were devised for our plant. For example, and I can't remember the building name offhand now, but we had only the second nuclear research facility for criticality in the United States at Rocky Flats, the first one being at Los Alamos. And a good friend and neighbor of mine down at Los Alamos operated that one. Ours was first operated by a man named Clarence Shusky. Did you hear that name from anyone?
I think I have, yeah.
Clarence Shusky, and right now, as of today, Bob oh, what's his name? He runs a lot of railroads in his home. You know him?
I interviewed him. Yeah.
Yeah. He came in as a young man with a PhD, worked under Schiske, and then he became the later manager of the facility there. And I saw him recently out at Rocky Flats. But anyway, that was only the second facility of its kind in the entire United States. And Schiske and I did one experiment together, well, a series of experiments to increase the safety of our enriched uranium plant, because I first had it set up operating as a batch facility, which meant everything was done batch-wise in tanks of various sizes under what we call batch control. We would use measuring instruments for the radioactivity to determine roughly how many grams of uranium were in the tank, and we were not allowed to exceed a certain limit. And our for each of those things, the radiation, the criticality point might have been 2.5 to 3 times more than we were allowed to process on a batch basis. And finally, when we got operating on big scale, and my plant was running 3 shifts a day, people began to tell me, Burt, you've got to do something about this. You are going to have a criticality incident. You can't help it with this much material around and all these people working. Even though you're very exacting with it, something's got to be done.
Because the batches would be, even though one batch had not that much radioactive material, there might be another one nearby. Was that?
That's right, and you had to have criticality spacing and all that sort of thing. Well, Schiske and I got our heads together, and he found out that back at Oak Ridge they were experimenting with Pyrex glass, because of the boron content in there, to absorb the neutrons that would help avoid a criticality incident. I don't know if anybody explained this to you, but the neutrons want to get out of these materials, and if you have something, if you have too much together where they bounce back and forth, that's when you get the criticality incident. Now, if you have another material that will absorb those neutrons, then it's not going to happen. Well, in Pyrex glass, the boron, naturally occurring boron, has 2 isotopes, almost like one's 48%, the other's 52%, something close like that. And I can't tell you which one is the one that absorbed neutrons now. I just don't remember. But one of them does absorb neutrons, so that they decided if you could put glass pipe in your tanks, that will save you from criticality incident. Well, there's no way we could retrofit our existing stuff with glass pipe. So I came up with the idea of having a Raschig ring. Have you heard about the Raschig rings? About using cutting the boron glass pipe into 2 inches long pieces to form Raschig rings. Raschig ring being a very common separator in the chemical engineering industry in towers, where you want to separate vapors from gases. You run them through the Raschig rings, and all the vapor comes down. I mean, the liquids come down the bottom, and the vapors go through dry. They come out relatively dry. Well, these things then we could pour into our tanks, and done very carefully, assure no breakage and all this. And so we retrofitted my whole set of tanks, of which there were hundreds in that building, with Raschig rings, and operated that until that plant was closed down at the end of the duality period, when they decided they only needed one place to make things, and they quit doing enriched uranium at Rocky Flats in 1964. It closed that plant down. That's when I started getting involved in plutonium things, then, which was not really my expertise. That's why I started doing a lot of different things, for the plant. But the Raschig rings were then taken up in the plutonium processing areas also, and it's a standard today in the industry. It's an ANSI standard, if you know what an ANSI standard is, American National Standards Institute. Schiske worked that up into an ANSI standard. So that's how we got by to get through without any criticality incidents. And by the time they were doing the newer plutonium processes, they were going more and more to what we call safe dimension equipment. In other words, no bigger than a certain diameter, spacing no closer than several of those in arrays and all this sort of stuff. And that's what they developed down on that criticality unit. Mm-hmm. And
well, you said that criticality was the nuclear industry's biggest fear. Do you think it should have been? Were there other things that actually at Rocky Flats?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. We did not fear the radiation at all because we had enough shielding for the radiation in the plant to take care of that aspect. And if a person followed all the regulations about wearing his respirator when necessary and all that kind of stuff, people were not concerned about ingesting radioactive materials into their body or being exposed to too much radiation. There were a few people that got over the dose limits through minor accidents and that sort of thing. I myself, for the years, I have maybe I think when I left the plant, they told me I had maybe a 3/10 of a body burden of plutonium, but nothing to be concerned about at all as far as I'm concerned. And I'm part of the program out at the Washington State University, where there, as people in this industry die, we donate whatever parts of our body they would like to study for radioactivity and study the effects, see if we'd had any cancer from it, things of that sort. So, but no, everybody feared the possible criticality accident much more than the radiation.
Mm-hmm. And what about other, non-radioactive events?
Well, being an industrial plant, there's always the possibility of chemical explosions. We had a few out there through the years. Fires from various chemical sources or otherwise, not talking about the big fire now from plutonium, but normal fires. Yes, always had those concerns, but we had exceptionally good fire department, exceptionally good alarm systems. We had everything was state of the art and exceptionally good, I would say.
Well, do you want to talk about the fire now, the 67?
All right. Well, when that fire occurred, I happened to be coming home from a nice vacation with two other Rocky Flats people. We had gone out to the Canyonlands to explore the canyons and all this stuff. I had a four-wheel drive, and we were out there on a one-week camping trip. And as we were driving home that evening, we were coming up, I think, from Colorado Springs on the highway to Denver. We heard about the fire at Rocky Flats.
On the radio? Or?
On the radio. Mm-hmm. And when we got home, of course, there were messages for us to contact our management, that sort of thing. So the next day when I got out to the plant, learned the extent of this. Oh, we have a window washer. See, we have these things done for us here. Excuse me. The plant, of course, was just in a disarray that next day because they hadn't yet organized as to how they were going to go about the cleanup. The fire department was thoroughly exhausted. They had dragged some radiation outside on their suits, out through the doors, on driveways, just a few feet outside the building. There had been some leakage from through the filter system on top of the building, but it was pretty much retained on the roof. It didn't go anywhere because the particles are heavy and they tend to come out quickly. And so it was several days before things got organized. They started to organize the crew that would go in to take out these large quantities of plutonium, because each part burned up to oxide, and you had a pile of black oxide there and a pile of black oxide. These were in the long lines that ran through the glove boxes And that all had to be taken out and gotten into individual containers for safe storage. The first thing that had to be done, of course, was the maintenance electricians and some fire people went in to set up emergency lighting. It was so black in there the first time I went in that you couldn't see anything. The lights just disappeared. I mean, a light of that size, like that lamp, just disappeared in the darkness in that big building. They had to string enough lights that you could finally walk around, and then Leo Grill was placed in charge of the recovery effort. There were about 15 to 20 of us, I think, of experienced people, not hourly workers. These were salary workers, mostly management people, that went in to get this plutonium out. Now, I was his backup, as you saw by the letter. And we went in there, we went in pressure suits, if you heard about the pressure suits. We were in, well, first, before they got the good airlock stations set up, before Health Physics got that set up, we went in with air bottles like the firemen carried. And so we worked on that, and you could only work, I think the bottle was good for 30 minutes, and we had to get out. One time I stretched it a bit too much, and I was huffing and puffing to get out there before I ran out of oxygen, and they could get me out of the suit. But for the most part, that went smoothly. Then they got the system where they set up air pumps to put a hose line onto your suit, and then you could go in farther. You could range around, making sure you didn't get your airline tangled up, because sometimes we went in as far as 50 yards. That's a long distance of dragging hoses around corners and over broken down equipment that collapsed from the fire and this kind of stuff. It was pretty scary. But and then I got a special assignment out of that because nobody else wanted to do it. They were extremely worried about in the underpasses under the big lines that I'm trying to think of the name of the line, what we call the lines that had carried the carriers on it that went around and around and carried all the parts and materials. But they went through these long lines of glove boxes. Yeah, it was a carrier line of some kind.
Conveyor belt kind of thing?
No, it was on a chain. It was inside the glove boxes, and it was a chain, and then they had carriers attached at safe distances, and they could carry a part on this one, a batch of something else on this one, and so forth.
You clip it on, and it would.
You clip it on, and then you would punch a button, and you'd get, much like clothing racks in a cleaner's establishment.
Right.
So, but these things impeded your progress of walking from one side of the plant to the other. There were long lines. The one line was like 100 yards long. And so they had underpasses about 5 steps down. You'd stoop down, go under the glove box line, come up on the other side. And there were several of these, and several pits underneath big machinery at one area, and they filled up with water, which the firemen were using for fighting the fire. Now, no one knew how much plutonium might have been swept into the pits. And being covered with water, if you stirred that up, you'd have a criticality. So how do we find out and do all that? Well, I got the assignment of going in because I was a chemical person rather than a mechanical person. And one of my operators from the old days that I knew quite well, he says, "I'll go in with Burt and we'll do that." And we had little pumps, and we had a float, a styrofoam float, and we stuck the bottom of a hose through just like this. And with small hoses, this was just like 1/2-inch tubing that came to our small pump, and from the pump to big tanks outside the building. So again, Shusky rigged me a special instrument, and he said, if the count starts going up, that means the stuff is starting to get stirred around. Quit immediately and get out of there, see? So he gave me these instruments to set up by the pool, and we'd go back and sit maybe 10 yards from it or something like that, or someplace convenient to get away from it.
A little out of criticality distance, was that the
Well, yeah, although it goes pretty far, but at least not right on it. And we started pumping water out of the pits, and this chemical operator and I spent 2 weeks at that alone. The other time I spent helping carry plutonium oxide out. We finally got it down to the bottom and discovered that, hooray, there was no plutonium down there.
Wow.
So, and of course they kept, as we pumped water out, they kept monitoring through the analytical laboratory the concentration of any plutonium might be in the water, and it was very, very small. So finally they realized that was no hazard any longer, but they were really worried about that.
Yeah.
And so then finally that was over. After about, I think I spent 6 weeks doing that work, and then I was assigned to other work, and I no longer was involved with that cleanup.
Could you describe, I mean, what was it like to go into that building and just see the destruction
Well, it would be like seeing the destruction of any fire in a building where everything is blackened and charred and the metal parts are twisted, and the heat was so intense that many of the metal stuff, see a lot of the lines and stuff started to collapse because we didn't put any blanket of what am I trying to say, around the
fire protection kind of
fire protection around any steel posts or legs or anything like that. So a lot of those got hot enough that they, like red hot, and they'd lose their strength and they just collapse. And of course all the windows were broken out, and the carriers, this was an amazing thing too. What made the fire so fierce was the carriers were all made of magnesium. This little magnesium blanket and thing that went up to the line that ran around. Mm-hmm. And that magnesium caught on fire from the heat of the plutonium, and that's what spread from one carrier to the next, to the next, to the next. And turned out that in future design you could never do that again.
Well, did it give you second thoughts about the safety of the plant?
Oh, not me. I mean, old-timers like us, this was our life and our business. We never thought it unsafe. No, there's no way I'd ever tell anybody it was unsafe. Because the way we worked, it was safe. It was the safest industry by far that the world has ever seen. We would go through this with people, telling them, you look up at the industrial safety records of coal mining, of the transportation industry, of the airline industry, of this kind of chemical industry, of this and that and that. And for the millions and millions of man hours that we had throughout the whole complex of the DOE, there was only ever 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 deaths. 2 at Hanford, when they were taking the lid off a reactor, and there was one of the core units was stuck, and it dropped into place and made the reactor go critical while they had the top off. It blew up, and the 2 bodies were blown up in the superstructure. I mean, you know, they were dead, dead, dead. They had one accident at Oak Ridge where a man was killed because something exceeded a batch limit when it wasn't supposed to, and he died. Mm-hmm. It got enough. There are the 2 famous ones at Los Alamos. The first one, Harry Dalian, who was a young scientist that wasn't supposed to be playing with that dragon's tail experiment by himself. And he went in by himself one night because he was fascinated, and it went critical on him, and he died later on. All takes weeks, you know. Mm-hmm. And then the one where one assembly at Los Alamos during a period of assembly where in each of these cases, when it goes critical, it doesn't go critical fast enough to have a huge explosion, but enough explosion with force to blow things around, and this big burst of radiation with the big blue light and all. Mm-hmm. And one died there, and a couple others fairly severely injured. Other than that, all other accidents in the whole system were nothing but industrial accidents. Maybe a broken leg or arm from a fall, a bad cut, you name it, you know, things of that sort. Or maybe some minor injury from a chemical explosion or a whatnot. No, it was a safe industry, very safe.
Why do you think the public was so afraid
because they knew nothing about it, because we were so highly secretive that they never learned anything about it. And anything secret is that the public doesn't know, they fear. Mm-hmm. The public fears the unknown.
And what about radiation? Does it have its own fears attached to it that are different from other?
Well, if it does,
fears?
people like that simply wouldn't work in the business, I suppose. The people that worked in the business were taught about radiation. You won't feel what you're getting, you know, if you're getting any. If you get enough, you'll eventually get sick, or too much, you eventually die, but you don't feel getting the radiation. So there's no fear in that regard. You don't see it, you don't feel it, you don't smell it, you don't taste it. So.
Well, I would think that would, for me, I think it would make me even more fearful, because I wouldn't, at any moment something could be happening and you wouldn't know it. Did you ever think of it that way? That you
no, I didn't. You did your normal work. You were absorbed in the work you were doing. You just didn't think about it. I think that people that might think about it that way simply wouldn't work in the industry. Mm-hmm. That's the only way I can explain it.
Yeah.
You'd have to talk to a psychologist, I think, about something like that.
Did you have any friends or colleagues who were exposed to either radiation, you know, in batches enough that it became an issue, or beryllium, or even solvents or anything like that?
No.
Okay. Well, I wonder if it sounds like you were pretty intimately familiar with a lot of the buildings. Did you have a favorite one?
Well, my favorite one would have been 881, because I helped design the processes in there and trained the people to run it and ran it for 10 years. Mm-hmm. So obviously that was my baby. I was kind of devastated when they, I'd had 8 years of uranium experience at Los Alamos, 10 more at Rocky Flats. After 18 years, I felt like I'd lost the job.
When they took the enriched uranium?
Yeah, when they said they're not going to run that plant anymore and going to shut it down. Then that's when I got into these other things.
Yeah. And 881 was one of the underground ones.
That's right? what was yes, very much so.
Big one.
Uh-huh.
And so, were the building, had other buildings you worked in been bunkers like that, been underground that way? I don't know if Los Alamos, if they were.
No, Los Alamos, they were all wartime tin sheds practically above ground. I mean, as unsafe as you could be. They had just the rudiments of good filtration systems. They hadn't developed all that stuff yet. When I did a little bit of plutonium work at Los Alamos. When the first 9 grams of plutonium came down from Hanford to be delivered to Los Alamos, so the scientists could each get a few milligrams or whatever they could determine properties of it, either radiation-wise, chemical-wise, for reactions, metallurgic-wise if necessary. It was dealt out to a number of people, and when it came back, it had to be taken out of whatever junk they had it fixed in, and we had a small group of recovery. This is before I got into uranium recovery, which was my ultimate career, to recover this plutonium chemically in small quantities, beakers and small things. And when we did that work, the glove boxes had not yet been invented. We worked through the old college fume hoods with about that much of the door open, and they put on a pretty high draft of ventilation, sucking it in through filters, so that if you had a piece of paper out here, it would suck it in immediately if you let it go. And we were wearing rubber gloves up to our shoulders, long gloves, and a respirator, and that was our protection.
So that
for that plutonium work. Nothing like the glove boxes of later days that were absolutely safe.
So what were some features of 881 that were especially unique or novel, that were really cutting edge?
Excuse me, what was the first part of the question?
I was just wondering, what were some of the features of 881 that at the time were very cutting edge or new to the industry? to architecture?
Of course, the ventilation system, the huge ventilation system, which they also had in the plutonium building. But that was very cutting edge. And some of the other, in my operation, one thing that was very cutting edge was my floors. I had a plant that covered 4 floors from a basement area through 2 main areas and one kind of balcony area at top. 4 floors. We had an elevator to take equipment up and down if we needed to, and we had stairways. All 4 floors were covered with stainless steel and were welded seamlessly, so that all tested, so that there was no leakage of anything on the floor down to any other place. First time it was ever done in the history of any kind of processing.
Wow. And
it was very expensive, of course. Yeah. And then all my equipment was stainless steel, because we handled large quantities of nitric acid. I got my nitric acid in from the Luvier's plant down here in Colorado. You know, I don't know if you know about this. You know where Luvier's is, down South Santa Fe Boulevard? You know where Highland Ranch is now? Well, if you go on past there and go down the Platte, not the Platte Valley, but the Cherry Creek Valley where it comes up, there used to be a number of industrial plants there. One was a DuPont explosives plant that was built, I think around World War I time, made explosives, perhaps munitions, also did a lot of dynamite production for the mining industry in this area. And a byproduct of that is nitric acid, and it's very pure. And I needed very pure nitric acid. I bought my nitric acid from them in tank car quantities, and the railroad brought it out. We had 2 big tanks up near 444 building where the railroad came by. They would pump it into those tanks, and I had a pipeline from there down into my plant in 881 building. And that's why we had to have the stainless floors, and we did have a big spill one time of quite a few gallons of nitric acid on the floors. I got called out in the middle of the night, and I had to go out and help my operators, you know, get us to see if they clean it up right and everything, all in respirators and you know, equipment.
And the floors did the
safety.
Job? Huh? The floors did their job?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That'd be very fashionable now, stainless steel floors.
Oh, are they?
Stainless steel, everything is fashionable now.
I suppose, but they're still expensive.
Yeah, I bet.
Mm-hmm.
So that does sound like very...
Yeah, now they did a little bit of stainless steel flooring in some of the plutonium areas later on, but not much. Mm-hmm. It was, they found other ways around it.
Any other architectural wonders in that building, or others that you worked in that?
I don't know. I don't think so, really. Each of our building and the plutonium building had, and even 444, all had radiography vaults, which were unusual, because in order to determine various conditions about the parts that were made in the assembly and so forth, they had to be X-rayed, but you couldn't X-ray in the usual manner of human X-rays. It had to be done with very high radiation, cobalt-60 sources, and those were very specially built. Now that would have been a hazard to anybody that could they ever have gotten through those 5 feet of concrete walls and steel doors this thick and everything. When they put that stuff in the vault to be radiographed, you'd die pretty instantly, I think, if you were in there with that radiation. But it was very carefully controlled, interlocks, you know, and 2 people having to control switches and all this kind of stuff.
So how did you like working below ground?
Oh, that didn't bother me any. I'm just not a fearful person, I guess. Some people, we had some people that would transfer out after a while and say they couldn't stand it, never seeing the outside. Mm-hmm. and had to get a different job, and that did affect some people. It didn't affect me. I suppose it would be the same thing as working in a mine, except that we had very clean conditions, and of course the entire building was kept at a constant temperature at 68 degrees centigrade for technical reasons, and always fresh air, and we always had good light, and our offices and everything were inside that building, couldn't see out. We had a cafeteria in there that the food was brought down from the main cafeteria. It was very nice. Eat lunch in there, the whole bit. I mean, just like miners do. But like they had rough conditions. We had nice conditions.
One of the things that Ed Voda told me was that when they started to employ more women in the production facilities and in the hot areas, that there were issues with the laundry and stuff like that. I wonder, as a building manager or supervisor, I don't know what your official title was, if you noticed how, if you had to change buildings around as sort of the workforce changed with the times.
Well, now in the very beginning, we had very few women we had no women in the production areas at all. We did have some women working in the analytical laboratories that were subject to some of the same clothing changes and stuff that we were. And the rest of the women were in offices, secretaries, various business operations. So, but as far as their clothing was concerned, each of the major buildings had its own laundry. And those laundries would then send the wash water through pipelines over to the big ponds that you've probably heard about, those solar evaporation ponds. It would be sent over there for evaporation, and that all became very, very low-level waste in later years. When we dried up the ponds and sent the salt residue for storage out in Nevada. But I think the women were mostly upset because they didn't like the kind of underwear and that sort of stuff that was furnished to them. It was very generic, and women being women, I don't think they took too kindly to it, because all the men's underwear was furnished, the coveralls, the booties. They furnished safety glasses to everyone, prescription if necessary, clear if not. Everyone carried a respirator, wore it if the alarm went off from health physics stating, hey, there's something in the air that's above the level we allow, put your respirators on, and so forth. I don't know. But that became a way of life after all those years, you know, you adapted to that very easily.
So what did you do about the women's underwear problem?
You know, I really don't know. I don't think I know details of that. I suppose they got them nicer stuff in later years.
All right. So I think we're going to get through this, actually. I am wondering, in terms of union and management relations, did you feel that the union was a powerful presence at the plant? And
Oh, absolutely, they had a powerful presence. You bet. And the union always supported management in one regard, and that was safety. If you put out criticality regulations or other safety regulations about how you did your processing, the union would back up management if one of their people broke one of those rules. And I had to dismiss a couple of people through the years for breaking those rules. And the union never batted an eye with me because we'd given them full details of what happened, and they said, we don't want a guy like that around. Out he goes. So I got backed up by the Kelly brothers. Now, other things, that's a different story. You get into overtime, or you get into seniority and all this kind of stuff, or the different pay grades for, you know, what kind of work they do. You know, that had to go through negotiation, And that was often contested then, and would go to grievance committee and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But now let's see, what was your original question?
If they were how powerful they were.
Yes, they did have a powerful presence. And Dow respected that. Mm-hmm. Dow respected that because Dow was a union company throughout all their plants. Mm-hmm. So they were used to dealing with unions.
Was the union, did it ever get in the way of doing the job, did you feel?
In a small way in later years, yes, when the unions got more and more powerful. The unions, this is a political thing now. As the years went by, the Department of Energy added more people to their staff. Our original staff at Rocky Flats was about 12 people in that office. By the time I retired, they had over 100. Now, the more people you get in that staff looking after various aspects of your operation, like safety, like manpower, your budget, all this kind of stuff, the more the unions would start to get to those people and tell them stories about what they thought was wrong with the way the plant was being managed. It just seems that the unions just don't normally apply 100% loyalty to their employer. They want to try to nitpick a little bit here and there. And so as that happened, then the DOE began to favor the unions a bit more, and that increased their power. So toward the end of the plant working, Dow withdrew for two reasons after 24 years. One reason was that they could no longer see the viability of any commercial gain from working in those nuclear materials. Originally, Dow hoped that they could use the uranium industry in particular to make fuel rods for the power industry. That's what they had hoped, and it never came to pass. So now they're getting tired of operating the plant for that reason, because they weren't making all that much money out of it. Right. The second reason was, as the union became more powerful, Dow began to feel that, hey, they're starting to get to our unions in other plants, and we think that they are getting too powerful, and they might pass that on to their brethren in our plants. We don't want that, so Dow dropped the contract. And that's pretty much true.
Yeah. How would you describe the difference between Dow and Rockwell?
The differences there were that when Rockwell came in, like Dow, they had no background in this business. Well, I'll have to take that back. They had a little background in this business because they had a very small plutonium laboratory out at their San Fernando plant in California. I visited that a couple times for various reasons. And some of our employees, after Rockwell took over, went out to work for them in that little facility. But other than that, when they came to Rocky Flats, they had no concept of the size. They thought they knew a lot about plutonium because of this little laboratory they had. And they came to Rocky Flats, and their eyes just almost bulged when they saw the size of it. I spent about 3 months working with some of the technical managers of Rockwell. When they came in, they sent about a half a dozen of their staff, some technical, some on the financial side and so forth, to Rocky Flats as a preliminary cadre to learn about this business before they actually took over the plant. And in that time that they were there, I worked with a lot of those people, teaching them a lot of the stuff, took them around on extensive tours, showed them what, and they tell me, Burt, I can't believe you got this much material. I just can't believe it. They were shocked. That was the difference between like a thimbleful to a barrelful, see?
Right.
So in that regard, then Rockwell came in, they first had this preconceived notion that we can really run this thing. Then they lost their cockiness after they found out how it really was. And then it went quite well after that. And I enjoyed working with Rockwell. I had no problem with that in my regard.
You just sort of finished up about Rockwell.
Oh, about Rockwell. Well, I retired, of course, before Rockwell left, because I worked 7 years while Rockwell was there. And by that time, production schedules were slowing down, and even though we were building those big new buildings and our time was mostly taken up with them, I was project manager for part of those big buildings, the waste treatment plant. I was project manager on that one. And so I had to spend a lot of time with that sort of thing and get the operations going. By that time I was working under Ed Vovoda, and you know, running that big new plant, getting it going. And of course it was the last thing to shut down because they needed that plant to process a lot of the waste right up to the end, or the liquid waste, not the solid waste. And like I say, I don't know, Rockwell was different from Dow in that in the early days, Dow was a very family-oriented company. And they used to have family picnics for us in the early years, and we used to go to safety award banquets, you know, to nice places and have nice meals and all this sort of stuff. And they were always very, very conscious of the family. Rockwell didn't seem to exhibit that type of quality at all. But by then my kids were grown up, and you know, I don't suppose I missed anything in that regard. And I guess I wouldn't know what else to say about Rockwell.
Well, I mean, you had mentioned that production was dwindling. How did you feel when you heard that production had stopped?
Well, when production actually stopped, I was already gone. It continued after the time I left, and by that time I was working for Los Alamos Technical Associates, and our office was out in Broomfield. And we were doing small projects for the plant. One of the projects that I did for the plant as they were closing up was kind of interesting to me. The criticality facility still had several tanks full of Rashig rings and enriched uranium nitrate solution in there, which I had furnished them many years before to Clarence Shusky from my plant to do this kind of work. It was still there, and they didn't know how to get rid of it. Now, I guess it wasn't Rockwell this time. Who took over after Rockwell?
EG&G.
EG&G. I guess EG&G, that they didn't know how to get rid of it safely, and they gave a small contract to Los Alamos Technical Associates to advise them how to do it. And I worked up a little scheme for them. Whether they used it or not, I have no idea. But I told them how it could be done safely and all, because they were going to transfer that back to Oak Ridge.
So you had mentioned a couple of things, that you mentioned about the site selection and the choice of the particular site, and then you also discussed the studies, or the two bookends of your career, I guess, at Rocky Flats, the study that talked about closure. So I guess I'm wondering if you were surprised when production stopped, or it sounded like you had sort of predicted.
Oh, no, I knew it was going to stop.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I knew all that all along. Yeah, I mean, up through the time I left, you know, I was still carrying top clearance, and we'd get in reports from things out of Washington as to what their intentions might be and stuff like that, sure.
And in terms of the site selection, did you think that such a facility was appropriate since the city grew up around Rocky Flats?
Well, that would be a hard question to answer, because I never saw the individual data that much of why they chose the Rocky Flats plant. But to me at the time, it seemed perfectly suitable being 16 miles from downtown Denver, and I don't suppose any of us at the end of World War II like that had the crystal ball as to how the West was going to develop this rapidly and things grow larger so quickly. So I guess we thought it was a great place to be. I know it was a chore for us to drive out all those miles through those. At first it was just a dirt road to get there, you know. From here, when I lived in Wheat Ridge, we'd go out Indiana. We would then go out 72, which now goes up Coal Creek Canyon. And from 72 on, it was dirt and rocky and rough, and people just would blow out tires. In those days, tires weren't built as good as they are now. Springs weren't as good on cars and all that sort of thing. That's 50 years ago. And that was a chore to drive out that nasty road every day. Most of us were in carpools. I was in a carpool anywhere from 3 to 5 people for all the years I worked out there, which modern people don't do. And it was very wonderful. But we kept, for the most part, pretty regular hours. I had a period of time in one of my jobs when I had to stay over a lot, and I had to drive by myself to stay over and read documents and do desk work that I couldn't finish during the regular day. But for the most part, we kept regular hours. That's the way a production plant runs when it's running smoothly. Now, if you had an accident, then you had to stay over and that sort of thing. But
so now, do you think that such a plant would be selected in that location?
No,
or, yeah.
no, it wouldn't be. From what we know today, no, it would not be placed there.
Yeah. Well, how do you feel about in the wake of the Cold War and its ending, sort of as your career ended, it closed the plant as well. How do you feel about having worked in the nuclear weapons industry?
The number one thing with all of us, I think, that knew what was going on is that there's no question that the number of weapons built by the United States, and of course, like I say, the majority of them there at Rocky Flats, won the Cold War. We bankrupted Russia by staying ahead of them. And that's what won the Cold War. They finally ran out of money and materials. They couldn't keep up with us, and they obviously are not going to start anything unless they had more than we had. And for the same reason today, by keeping the much smaller stockpile that's required by treaty now, I hope and trust that we never, never give up that stockpile, for the simple reason that, there are 12 nations now that can make bombs and have them, and you've got to keep that as a deterrent, because they know if they start something with us, they're not probably going to exist. Because I'm a hawk in that respect. I don't want to see any more wars. I don't want to use atomic weapons. But if someone were to drop one here, I would say annihilate that country. Annihilate it. Now that's my own personal feeling. And if I talk that way to certain friends or people, they'd think I'm a nasty person. You don't really believe that, do you? I do. I do believe that wholeheartedly.
Okay. How did you feel about the protests?
Well, they were an annoyance, of course, and although I had to work with protesters on occasion. We held some public meetings where the protesters came, and I had to speak at them and some of these things occasionally because we're doing the study. And you just have to put up with it. I don't agree with them because I think they're totally uneducated about it. But then there are people that believe in psychics and believe in other things that I don't believe in. You know, with a scientific mind, I can't believe in that kind of stuff. And a lot of people, they believe in various shady things, you know, and they honestly believe it. So what can you do? You just have to put up with it. I'm not going to fight them physically or anything like that. But if I have the legal power to hold them off, I will use the legal power. And that was done at Rocky Flats, and I don't think anyone ever got hurt. There was no arm breaking or anything like that out there ever. They were treated decently. Mm-hmm. They didn't always treat some of us decently, but you know, saying nasty things and all that. You just have to ignore it.
Did you have any personal contacts, neighbors or friends who, you had said that there were some friends that if you said annihilate another country too would be upset. Were there any personal debates in your life about your work as in?
No, if I sensed a person was on the other side, I just wouldn't talk about it. I wouldn't get involved, no. Now here in this facility, we average 80 plus years. I'm going to be 84 in November. We have people here in the 90s. They all went through World War II. They're pretty much, when I talk to people here, and they know I worked at Rocky Flats, pretty much say, well, and at Los Alamos, you did a good thing. Because those of us in World War II that knew the circumstances, knew that the Japanese would not give up, and it was going to cost millions of lives to win that war. But when we put those 2 bombs down, they quit now, like that. And it's well documented by even anti-sources that yes, that probably saved several million lives by dropping those bombs. However, I will say that I don't want to use any of them anymore. I have a book in my collection here, put out by some outfit, probably in cooperation with the Japanese, that showed the destruction of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. It's pretty grim. My wife, when she was working at Los Alamos, saw pictures that our intelligence got back shortly after it, showing the hideous burns and disfigurations on people when she was working in the health physics office down in Los Alamos. So we know what it's like.
Did that hit home? I mean, had you realized before you saw those photos what it was going to be like?
Yes, because of the incidents at Los Alamos when Dalian and I can't think of the other man's name, when they died, the word got around it was pretty gruesome, Yeah.
That's got to be sobering. So how did your wife and your family, I mean, I guess your wife was also working at Los Alamos. How was it hard not being able to discuss your work with your family?
Yeah, I guess in a way it was. I was, you might say, proud of what I was doing, and I had a responsible job always, and of course she knew somewhat of what I was doing because she was cleared not for weapons knowledge down there, but she knew generally what was going on because she had a clearance too. And obviously we didn't discuss it with our children as they were growing up, and by the time they got to school age here in Wheat Ridge, we were just in the habit of never just not talking about it. Mm-hmm. They knew I worked out there, they knew I had something to do with atomic bombs, and they didn't seem to care. And I don't know. So I guess it didn't affect our life really. But now that they're older, they'd like to know more. Now I can tell them more.
Okay, well, we have 2 minutes left. We have sort of a wrap-up question. Just
all right.
What were the best and worst things about working at Rocky Flats?
The best and the worst things. Well, the best things were that I had a wonderful career out there, and I managed to rise to a nice level of income, so we had a good life out of it. I was able to send my girls to college and all this kind of stuff. And the worst thing about it, if you're thinking of scale from 1 to 10, the best thing would be a 10. I had a wonderful career and a wonderful life out of it. On the worst thing about it, the scale would only be maybe a 1 or 2 or 3. I mean, there was nothing really that bad about it. A pain in the neck to drive out that far every day and back, especially in the snowstorms in the wintertime. That was not nice. Other than that, I don't know if there was anything I didn't like about it.
That's not a bad record for a 40-year career, 50-year career.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Burt, very much for sharing your stories with us. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm been happy to talk to you and be happy to give you other information as questions may come up. You can call me anytime on the phone, or if you have small questions, email them and I can answer that. I don't want to put in big email answers, but
Okay.
but I'll answer, you know, one paragraph liners, that sort of thing.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Okay. My memory isn't that good anymore, you know. I've kind of let it go out of my mind too, a lot of it. And you'll have to compare some of the things I said with some of the others on the same topics and see how it falls out.